"Get your hands off my gate, ma'am. This is private property." That's what I heard the rancher shout, as the flashing red and blue lights painted the whole neighborhood like it was the 4th of July. Karen, the president of the HOA and queen of the clipboard, stood in front of the rancher's wide metal gate with 2 police officers beside her. She had a smug grin like she had just won a gold medal in the Olympics of tattletaling. The rancher? He was leaning against his fence in muddy boots, arms crossed, calm like a lion before the pounce. "I warned you about this," Karen snapped, pointing at the large wooden barn that sat at the edge of his property. "You're in violation of the community guidelines." The cops exchanged looks, one of them lifting his sunglasses. "Ma'am, is this an emergency? You said he had dangerous animals on the premises." "He does," Karen said, jabbing her finger like she was hitting a buzzer. "He has cows, and goats, and chickens. He even has a turkey." "A turkey?" the younger officer repeated, deadpan. "Yes, it gobbles loudly at 6 a.m. every morning. He's disturbing the peace. You need to do something now." The rancher chuckled and pulled something from his back pocket. "You might want to take a look at this first." What happened next left everyone, including the officers, completely stunned. The entire block stood in silence. Karen's mouth dropped open. The cops froze. Then everything spiraled out of control. But before we get to the part where Karen's plan crumbles like a stale cookie, let me take you back to how it all began. It all started 6 months ago, when an old man named Hank bought the last property at the end of the cul-de-sac in Cedar Pines, a small gated community just outside of Austin, Texas. Now Cedar Pines was the kind of place where lawns were as perfect as magazine covers, and neighbors waved just enough to say, "I see you," but not "let's be friends." It was quiet, controlled, and clean, just the way Karen liked it. Karen had lived there for 12 years. She had been the HOA president for 11 of them. She was tall, blonde, and wore the same pink visor almost every day. She carried a clipboard like it was part of her body and took pictures of people's trash cans if they were left out for more than 15 minutes past pickup. So, when Hank moved in, with a trailer full of chickens, goats, and a big OL longhorn steer named Buttermilk, you can bet Karen's clipboard practically burst into flames. But Hank was different. He wasn't rude, just quiet. Kind too. The kind of guy who offered fresh eggs to his neighbors and gave little kids pony rides on weekends. He fixed the old barn on the edge of his land, which technically was part of the Cedar Pines HOA, but barely. His house sat right where the neighborhood met the open fields, like someone dropped a little piece of the country into the middle of suburbia. First, everyone was curious. "Did you see the goats?" Little Mason from Lot 14 asked his mom. "They're kind of cute," said Olivia from down the street. "And he gave me a jar of fresh honey." Even Karen's husband, Bill, thought Hank was all right. But Karen? Oh no, she hated it from day one. "This is not a petting zoo," she snapped at the HOA meeting in February. "We have standards. Our property values depend on them." "But he's not hurting anyone," said Mr. Jenkins from Lot 7. "And technically, his land is on the outer edge. That section's never had a zoning issue. That land is under HOA jurisdiction," Karen shouted. "I checked the bylaws." But here's the thing, Karen may have thought she knew the bylaws. But Hank had something she didn't. Experience. The man had been a rancher for 40 years. He'd seen droughts, floods, and even fought off coyotes. A lady with a visor and a clipboard didn't scare him. Still, Karen didn't back off. Over the weeks, she started collecting evidence. She took photos of chicken feathers in the grass. She recorded the turkey gobbling at sunrise. She even claimed the goats were glaring at her with evil eyes. Then came the first warning letter. Then the second. And then the third. Hank didn't say much. Just smiled, nodded, and kept handing out fresh eggs and homemade jam. But Karen wasn't smiling. She had a plan. A big one. It started with a neighborhood petition. Then she posted angry notes on the community Facebook group, calling Hank's barn an infestation site. But when none of that worked, she made the boldest move yet. She called the cops. And not just once. She called them 3 times in 1 week. reporting everything from stray animals to illegal fencing. The police came, of course, but each time they found no real issue. Until the fourth call, when Karen said the words, dangerous animals and possible health hazard. That's when the officers showed up serious. Sirens, lights, the whole thing. Neighbors stepped out of their homes, kids peeked through windows, and the rumor mill spun faster than a tornado. Back at the scene, the air was thick with tension. One of the officers asked Hank to come forward. Do you keep any wild or dangerous animals on this property, sir? Nope, Hank said calmly. Just farm animals. Got their permits and everything. Karen scoffed. He's lying. He's been warned 3 times. You have to do something. That's when Hank pulled something from his pocket. A thick, crinkled envelope. He handed it to the officer. The man opened it, read a few lines, then looked up, eyes wide. We have a situation, he said to his partner. This changes everything. Karen leaned forward, trying to peek. What does it say? What is it? But the officer didn't answer. Instead, he turned toward the patrol car and radioed something into his mic. That's when Hank smiled, and Karen's face started to fall. Because what was in that envelope? It wasn't just any permit. It was something else. Something that made Karen realize, for the first time ever, that she may have messed with the wrong cowboy. Just as the neighbors held their breath, the sound of a siren got louder. Another police car pulled in. And from that car stepped someone no one expected to see. Karen's eyes went wide. Oh no, she whispered. And that's where everything started to unravel. What was in that envelope? Who was the person in the second patrol car? And why did Karen suddenly look like she'd seen a ghost? You're gonna want to sit down for this next part. The second patrol car rolled to a stop, tires crunching on the gravel like a warning. All eyes turned as the door swung open, and out stepped a tall man in a spotless sheriff's uniform, cowboy hat in one hand, sunglasses in the other. Karen gasped. Sheriff Donnelly? She squeaked, her clipboard now hanging limp at her side. The sheriff gave her a polite nod, then walked straight toward Hank with a warm grin. Hank McGraw, you old son of a gun. Heard you'd settled down somewhere, but I didn't know it was right here in Cedar Pines. Hank tipped his hat. Don, you still giving folks a hard time over parking tickets? Donnelly chuckled. Only when they don't bake me peach cobbler like your sister used to. The officers beside Karen looked visibly confused. Wait, you two know each other? Know each other? Sheriff Donnelly said, laughing. Hank saved my life during that wildfire near Bastrop in '98. If he says he's got legal livestock and zoning rights, then trust me, he does. Karen blinked. Wait. What? The sheriff turned toward her, finally giving her the full weight of his attention. Ma'am, I was briefed on your complaint on the way over, he said, voice calm but firm. And I understand you've made several calls in the past week? Yes, Karen snapped, rallying her usual confidence. Because this man is breaking multiple HOA rules. He's keeping livestock. He's causing noise disturbances. He owns a legally zoned agricultural parcel. The sheriff interrupted, holding up the very document Hank had handed over. Right here in black and white. This land was grandfathered in under county ordinance long before the HOA was formed. It's technically outside your jurisdiction. Karen's face turned a shade of red only found in cartoon steam explosions. No, that can't be right. I checked the maps. I read the bylaws. Well, maybe you missed the original deed. Sheriff Donnelly handed the document back to Hank. His family's owned this land since 1953, and as long as he's not harming anyone, he's allowed to keep livestock, including turkeys. But, Karen began, stepping forward. The sheriff raised one hand. And just so we're clear, filing multiple false police reports? That is against the law. A ripple of gasps spread through the crowd. Someone in the back muttered, "Oh snap!" Karen's voice trembled. I didn't mean to file anything false. I thought I was protecting the community." The younger officer frowned. "You told dispatch there were dangerous animals. That's a serious claim, ma'am. There are protocols for that. Karen opened her mouth, but for once, no sound came out. Her hands clutched her clipboard like a lifeline. Hank looked around at the gathering crowd, then sighed. He stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Listen," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I didn't come here to stir up trouble. I just wanted a quiet place to live out my retirement. I like this land. I like these animals. And I got no problem with my neighbors, even if some of them got a problem with me." He turned and looked right at Karen. "But I believe in kindness. I believe in taking care of your community, even the parts that squawk at sunrise." A few people chuckled. "Now I've tried to be friendly," Hank continued. "I've given away eggs, jam, honey, heck, even hosted a birthday party for one of the neighborhood kids. I'm not here to fight." There was silence for a moment. Then a voice piped up from the crowd. "Hank gave me a whole basket of vegetables when I was sick last month." Another voice. "He helped my dad fix our fence after the storm." And another. "He let us feed the goats during spring break. My kids loved it." Karen looked around, realizing something that seemed to hit her like a slow wave. The neighbors weren't on her side. They were on his. Sheriff Donnelly tipped his hat again. "Well, unless there's a real emergency here, I think we're done." Karen stood frozen as the officers returned to their vehicles. One of them glanced at her clipboard and shook his head. "Turkeys," he muttered, before getting in the car and driving off. The sirens faded. The neighbors dispersed. And just like that, Karen was left standing alone on the sidewalk, facing a man she had tried so hard to push away. But this story was far from over. Because the next day, something happened that no one, not even Hank, could have expected. It was 5:45 a.m. when the scream broke the morning stillness. Not a turkey gobble. A human scream. Olivia, who lived 3 houses down, shot straight up in bed. "Mom, did you hear that?" Bill, Karen's husband, had already flung the sheets off. "Karen?" he called out. No answer. Down the street, lights flickered on one by one as neighbors peeked out their windows. Another scream. This one definitely Karen. Bill threw on a robe and bolted out the door. The source of the chaos? Karen's front yard. Or more specifically, what was in her front yard. Goats. 5 of them, licking her prized rose bushes. One nibbling on the welcome mat that read, HOA strong. Karen stood barefoot on the grass, hair in curlers, shrieking like someone had just stolen her identity. "Honk!" She pointed down the street like a villain in a movie. "Your goats are eating my yard." Within minutes, the entire neighborhood was out again. Hank came strolling down the road, still in pajamas, coffee mug in hand. "Well," he said, blinking, "that's a new one." Karen was stomping around, trying to shoo the goats like a frantic scarecrow. One of them bleated and trotted right past her, leaving behind a gift. "Oh my God!" she shouted. "That one pooped on my sidewalk." The neighbors watched, equal parts horrified and amused. "I don't know how they got out," Hank said, kneeling beside one. "They've never done this before. Fence is secure." Karen whipped around. "You did this on purpose." Hank looked genuinely confused. "Ma'am, I wouldn't do that even if I wanted to." The crowd murmured. Was this an accident? Or had Hank finally had enough of Karen's antics? Just then, Sheriff Donnelly's truck pulled up, again. He stepped out, eyebrows raised. "You folks just love keeping me busy, don't ya?" Karen marched up to him. "You see this? He sent his goats to attack me." Hank blinked. "Attack? Ma'am, they don't even have teeth sharp enough to eat an apple." Sheriff Donnelly sighed. "I'll take a look." He and Hank walked back toward the ranch. The sheriff inspected the fence, the gate, even the latch. Then he bent down. "Well, I'll be," he muttered. He stood up and held something in his hand. It was a small rock. Tied to it, a piece of twine. And on the twine, a tiny metal hook, bent open. Sheriff Donnelly looked over at Hank. "You didn't leave this here, did you?" Hank shook his head slowly. "Never seen that before." Karen, still in her yard, was busy scolding a goat that had laid down on her grass like it owned the place. Donnelly pocketed the hook, eyes dark with suspicion. Somebody let these goats out on purpose. A hush fell over the small group that had followed them. The sheriff turned, scanning the neighborhood, and just as he did, a motion light flicked on from the side of Hank's barn. Then the sensor beeped. A second later, a video feed popped up on Hank's phone. He glanced at it. His eyes widened. "Oh boy," Hank whispered. He showed the phone to the sheriff. Karen's face was on the screen, but not as she was now. No, this video showed Karen, at 4:17 a.m., holding a pair of garden shears, cutting the latch to the goat pen. She didn't know the barn had cameras. She didn't know Hank had upgraded the whole system last week after the false reports. She definitely didn't know she was being recorded. Sheriff Donnelly looked at the footage, then slowly turned to face the neighborhood. "I think we've got ourselves a case of criminal trespass," he said. Karen had no idea yet. She was still yelling about goat poop and rose petals. But when she found out what was on that video, well, let's just say, the real fireworks were only just about to begin. Sheriff Donnelly stood in silence, his jaw tight as he stared at the video playing on Hank's phone. The image was crystal clear. There was no mistaking the pink floral bathrobe, the white gardening gloves, and the unmistakable visor perched on top of a nest of messy blonde curls. Karen, at 4:17 a.m., snipping the latch to Hank's goat pen like she was trimming a hedge. A soft gasp rippled through the small group of neighbors who had gathered behind the sheriff, their curiosity too strong to resist. Olivia's dad let out a slow whistle. "Well, I'll be. Is that?" someone whispered. "Sure looks like it. Man, she's done it now." Back on her front lawn, Karen was too busy herding goats with a broom to realize that her moment of reckoning was seconds away. One goat, chewing on her garden gnome, gave her a blank stare as she waved the broom like a wizard casting out demons. "Out! Out! You hairy lawn monsters!" Bill stood by the porch, both hands on his head. "Karen, I don't think they understand English. They understand destruction. That's what they understand." Meanwhile, Sheriff Donnelly slid Hank's phone into his shirt pocket, his face unreadable. "I need to talk to her," he muttered, and walked slowly back toward Karen's yard. The goat who had been lounging on her doormat decided it was time to move and trotted off toward Olivia's place, leaving a little souvenir behind. When Karen saw the sheriff coming, she straightened her back, quickly smoothing her robe and trying to switch into official HOA mode. She held her clipboard like a sword and smiled. "Sheriff, I hope you're here to arrest this man for letting livestock run wild." The sheriff paused, hands on his belt. "Actually, I'm here to ask you a few questions, Karen." Her smile faltered. "Questions? About what?" He nodded back toward Hank's barn. "We've got security footage. Pretty clear footage. Shows someone tampering with Hank's gate early this morning." Karen blinked. What are you talking about?" He didn't flinch. "You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" Of course not. I was sleeping. In a pink floral robe and gardening gloves?" Silence. Bill groaned from the porch and rubbed his forehead. "Karen, please tell me you didn't." Karen's face was turning red again, but this time it wasn't from anger. It was panic. I was checking on the gate. For safety reasons." "By cutting the latch?" Sheriff Donnelly raised a brow. "With garden shears?" The neighbors had begun to gather again, drawn in by the smell of scandal and goat droppings. Olivia's mom held her coffee mug like she was watching a Netflix drama. "She totally did it," Olivia whispered. "She went full villain." Karen looked around, eyes darting. "You don't understand. He's a threat to our community. There are chickens in the cul-de-sac. There's a turkey that gobbles like a chainsaw." Sheriff Donnelly took a slow step forward. "Karen, you broke onto his property, cut through a secured fence, released livestock. That's not just a misunderstanding. That's criminal mischief, trespassing, maybe even animal endangerment." Karen's knees buckled a bit. "You wouldn't arrest me," she said, eyes wide. "Not me. I'd rather not," he said gently. But the law's the law. No one's above it. The word arrest made the crowd murmur louder. Hank stood by his barn, watching with a heavy heart. He didn't want revenge. He just wanted peace. But peace didn't seem to interest Karen. Her eyes narrowed. "You're all taking his side?" she cried. "He's not one of us. He doesn't belong in Cedar Pines." There it was. The real reason. Not noise complaints. Not zoning issues. Just fear of someone different. The crowd went still. Even the goats seemed to pause. And then a voice broke the silence. It was little Mason from Lot 14, clutching his mom's hand. "But Hank gave me a cowboy hat. And he lets me pet the chickens." Karen turned, her lip curling. "That's exactly what I mean. He's brainwashing the kids." Olivia's mom stepped forward. "No, Karen. He's kind. You remember what that is, don't you?" Karen's face turned pale. The sheriff let out a breath. "Karen, I'm going to need you to come with me." She backed up. No, this can't be happening." And then, crack. A loud snap echoed through the street, followed by a metallic creaking sound. Everyone turned. Smoke began rising from Hank's barn. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." The barn doors burst open, and a small flame flickered just inside. The wind caught it, fanning it. Someone screamed, "Fire!" Neighbors started shouting. Olivia ran for her house. Mason clung to his mom. Hank dropped his coffee and bolted for the barn. "It must have shorted. The gate wiring. I just rewired it." Sheriff Donnelly whipped out his radio. "This is Donnelly. We have a barn fire on Wildflower Drive. Request immediate fire response. Possible livestock in danger." Bill rushed toward Karen, whose eyes were locked on the growing flame. "Karen, what did you do?" I didn't mean to." "Did you mess with the wiring?" he shouted. "I was just trying to open the gate. I didn't know it was electric." But no one was listening anymore. Hank had reached the barn, shoving the doors open, coughing through the smoke. You could hear the panicked cries of animals inside. Chickens clucked wildly. The goats bleated from the front lawn. And somewhere, deep in the barn, gobble, gobble, the turkey. "Buttermilk," Hank yelled. "Come on, boy. You gotta move." Flames licked the rafters. Sparks rained down. The neighbors stood frozen. And then, boom! A small explosion from the back of the barn sent debris flying. The entire structure groaned like it was about to collapse. Olivia's mom shouted, "He's still in there." And just as the fire swallowed the doorway, Hank vanished into the smoke. Mason screamed. Karen dropped her clipboard. And every heart on the street stopped. Was this how it was going to end? Was the kind old rancher who gave away eggs and pony rides going to disappear in the fire because someone couldn't mind their own business? Bill ran toward the barn, but Sheriff Donnelly stopped him. "You'll just get yourself killed." They all watched in horror as the flames grew brighter. Seconds ticked by like hours. Then, a shape appeared, a limping figure, covered in soot, coughing hard but standing. It was Hank, and in his arms, the turkey. Everyone cheered. Olivia cried. Bill shouted, "Thank God!" Hank stumbled out of the barn just as the fire trucks arrived, sirens screaming. He dropped to his knees, the turkey clutched tight to his chest. Buttermilk let out a victorious gobble. And the people of Cedar Pines finally understood. This man was no outsider. He was a hero, but the damage had been done. And when the firefighters dragged out what was left of the smoldering barn, they found something no one had expected. Something that would change everything. Karen stood frozen as one of the firefighters held it up for Sheriff Donnelly to see. He narrowed his eyes. "What the heck is this doing here?" Hank stared, and a deep silence fell again. Because what the firefighter held wasn't just a burnt piece of wood. It was a box. And inside that box was something that could either save Hank or ruin him forever. And Karen? She knew exactly what it was. And that's when she made her move. Rain. It came hours after the fire, long after the flames had been doused and the barn reduced to a smoldering skeleton. a slow drizzle that blanketed the neighborhood in a gray hush, as if the sky itself needed a moment to process what had happened. But even the rain couldn't wash away the tension still crackling in the air, because while Hank sat in a wool blanket near the fire truck, his boots soaked and his arms scratched from the rescue, Sheriff Donnelly stood by the charred barn holding the half-burnt wooden box that had been pulled from the rubble. Karen? She hadn't said a word since the fire. Not one. She just stood there, stiff and pale, her visor clutched in one trembling hand, watching the box like it was ticking. The sheriff flipped open the scorched lid. Inside were a few papers, some photographs sealed in plastic, and, nestled in a foam cutout, a small, worn leather badge. Hank's badge. Sheriff Donnelly turned to him, confused. "You never told me you were?" Hank shifted uncomfortably. "Wasn't much to tell." Karen's eyes snapped to him. "Wait, what badge?" Hank sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Used to be a livestock inspector for the Texas Department of Agriculture. That badge is about 30 years old now. Didn't think it mattered. But it did matter, because suddenly, everything snapped into place for the sheriff. That explains the permits, the zoning knowledge, the way you handled everything by the book." Hank nodded quietly. Karen's hands shook. "So, that's what was in the box?" "No," the sheriff said slowly, turning the badge over. "That was just part of it." He pulled out the rest of the documents, some of them singed at the corners but still legible. The sheriff's brow furrowed deeper with every page he read. "These aren't just permits," he said. "These are legal grandfathering documents, signed by the county, the state, even the environmental board." Olivia's dad leaned closer. "What's that mean?" "It means Hank's land isn't just allowed to keep livestock," Donnelly said. "It's a protected agricultural zone. Nobody, not the HOA, not even the county, can force him off it." A stunned silence followed. Karen finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "That can't be right." Sheriff Donnelly raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that?" "But the HOA rules don't apply here. Not now. Not ever." Bill stepped forward, eyes wide. "So you're saying Karen's been threatening him for nothing?" Karen snapped. "I didn't know. I thought he was bluffing. He's been undermining everything we've built here. What he's built saved this neighborhood." Olivia's mom snapped back. The sheriff looked from Karen to Hank and then back to Karen. "And one more thing. I talked to the fire chief. He says the fire started because of damage to the wiring around the gate. Wiring that was tampered with." Karen's lips quivered. "Now, I know you said you just trimmed the latch, but this wasn't just a snip. It was a pull, a twist, and a full disconnect of the panel hot wiring. That takes intent." "I didn't..." Karen looked around, pleading now. "I didn't mean to cause a fire. I just wanted the goats to be gone." "You could have killed someone," Donnelly said. Her visor slipped from her hand and hit the wet ground with a soft plop. Then, like a thunderclap, Karen turned and ran. She bolted across her lawn in her soggy slippers, past the goat now resting peacefully under Olivia's birdbath, through the hedges, and straight into her house, slamming the door behind her. Nobody followed. Bill just stood there, his hands open, helpless. I don't know what she was thinking." Hank coughed into his hand. "She thought I didn't belong. That's all it ever was." The neighbors were quiet for a long while. Then Mason stepped forward again. "Hank, is Buttermilk okay?" Hank looked down at the soot-streaked turkey waddling in circles around his boots. "Still gobbling, ain't he?" Hank smiled. "I'd say he's just fine." The neighbors laughed, but it was soft, nervous. There was still a shadow hanging in the air. Later that evening, the fire trucks pulled away, and the rain turned to mist. Bill came over alone with a cooler of sandwiches and a thermos of soup. He didn't say much, just set them down beside Hank's porch. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for everything." Hank nodded. "Not your fault. But thank you. You gonna rebuild?" "Maybe," Hank said, looking at the blackened remains of the barn. "Or maybe it's time I try something new." Bill looked confused. "Like what?" "I don't know. Maybe open a little farm stand. Sell eggs and honey." Give the kids something real to see after school. Show people you don't need to be the same to be neighbors. Bill was quiet for a second. Then he said, "You'd be good at that." They shook hands. But as peaceful as the night had become, Karen wasn't done. Oh no, because when Sheriff Donnelly returned to his office that night, there was a voicemail waiting on his desk. A message left from a lawyer's office. Karen had already filed a formal complaint. But not just against Hank. Against everyone on the HOA board who hadn't backed her up. She was going nuclear. The next morning, the community woke up to legal notice of HOA review letters in their mailboxes. Karen was trying to take back control. And this time, she was playing dirty. But what she didn't know was that she wasn't the only one with legal cards to play. Because Hank hadn't shown everything in that fireproof box. And what came next would change Cedar Pines forever. Rain was still dripping off the rooftops when the sun peeked through the clouds the next morning. Cedar Pines smelled of wet grass, charred wood, and tension. The kind of tension that makes dogs bark for no reason and neighbors peek through their blinds like they're expecting a plot twist. And boy, were they about to get one. It started at 7:38 a.m. when every mailbox in the neighborhood received a thick envelope with a golden seal and bold block letters across the front. Civil notice of HOA corruption and protective zoning review. Karen had struck first. Inside the packet was a 3-page letter, typed in a font that screamed, "Angry real estate agent." She accused Hank of endangering community safety, harboring rogue livestock, and running an unauthorized agricultural operation designed to erode property value. She also called for an emergency HOA meeting to vote on a special resolution to remove Hank McGraw from the community via nuisance clause. But that wasn't all. The letter also included accusations against several board members, Mr. Jenkins, Olivia's mom, and even the treasurer, sweet old Mrs. Fuller, claiming they had willfully undermined HOA order by siding with Hank. It was ugly, really ugly. But what Karen didn't know was that Hank had been expecting this, because the fire had changed everything, not just for Hank, but for the whole neighborhood. See, people didn't just see Hank as that ranch guy anymore. They saw a man who ran into a burning barn to save animals that weren't just livestock, but part of the soul of Cedar Pines. And when the barn came down, it did more than burn wood. It burned away Karen's illusion of control. Still, Hank wasn't about revenge. He didn't want a war. He wanted peace. Which is why, as neighbors sat down to read Karen's legal rant, Hank was already 3 steps ahead. Because at 8:15 a.m., as if perfectly timed, another set of envelopes landed in every mailbox. These were thinner, but way more powerful. They were hand-signed letters from the County Zoning Commission, copies of documents Hank had quietly filed before the fire. He hadn't just rebuilt the barn in his head. He'd registered his land as a historical agricultural property. And guess what? That made his lot and everything on it untouchable by HOA regulation. Not just protected, permanent. But he didn't stop there. Hank had also filed a community integration proposal. It was something he'd worked on for years but never had the right reason to submit. Until Karen gave him one. His proposal to officially create a community partnership program that used his property for educational farming, neighborhood food sharing, and emergency response livestock. And the best part? It didn't just need county approval, it needed a community vote. A vote that would happen at the same emergency HOA meeting Karen had scheduled, thinking it would be her moment to shine. And so came that night, Friday, 7 p.m. The Cedar Pines Community Hall was packed. Not just with residents, but with reporters. Word had spread. A local paper had picked up the story of the goat war and the turkey hero. And now cameras were rolling as people filed into folding chairs, clutching copies of both letters. Karen's angry manifesto and Hank's calm, legal counterstrike. Karen entered last, wearing a tailored blazer, heels that clicked like gunfire, and her pink visor, freshly scrubbed. She walked to the front of the room like she owned it, until she saw the sheriff, and the county commissioner, and a large banner over the stage that read, Cedar Pines Community Emergency Vote, Agricultural Freedom and HOA Accountability. Her face dropped. Hank stepped up to the podium, clean shirt, polished boots, his turkey quietly gobbling in a crate beside him. Olivia had made it a name tag, Buttermilk, Fire Survivor. He cleared his throat. Folks, I didn't ask for this fight, but I believe something good can come from it. We've got a chance to build a bridge here, between country and community, between rules and real life. All I ask is that you vote for kindness. Vote for something real. Not fear, not control. Just something human. There was applause. Even Karen's husband clapped. She whipped around and glared. The commissioner stood next. He explained Hank's proposal. The benefits, the partnerships, the educational options, the legal protections, the fact that none of it could be blocked by the HOA. And then, the vote. The ballots were passed out. One box, support Hank's agricultural freedom proposal. The other, support HOA-driven nuisance resolution. One by one, the neighbors voted. Even the kids got pretend ballots, just to feel like part of it. Karen watched each slip of paper disappear into the box like bricks falling off her fortress. 10 minutes later, the sheriff and commissioner counted them. And when they came back up, the result? 87% in favor of Hank's proposal. The room erupted. People cheered. Mason ran up and hugged Hank. Olivia high-fived Buttermilk. Karen stood in the corner, shaking. I'll appeal this, she shouted. But no one was listening, because the community had made its choice. They chose Hank. They chose empathy. They chose peace. Later that night, Hank stood on his porch, sipping sweet tea. The charred remains of the barn still visible, but now surrounded by neighbors helping him rebuild. Bill walked up. Karen didn't come with him. She's taking some time off, Bill said awkwardly. Stepping down from the HOA board. Might move in with her sister for a while. Hank nodded. That might be good for her. She left this for you. Bill handed him a small envelope. Inside, a note, written in shaky cursive. I still don't like goats, but I think I was wrong. Sorry I started a war. Karen. Hank smiled, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was finally home. Because sometimes the biggest victories don't come from winning a fight. They come from surviving it with grace, and turning enemies into lessons, and barns into bridges. The goats bleated behind him. The turkey gobbled once more. And Hank McGraw, retired rancher, accidental hero, goat whisperer, sat back in his rocking chair, knowing that Cedar Pines had finally found its heart. And it smelled a lot like hay.